It was just a shoe, a tiny red sneaker half buried in the mud by the creek. But for Michelle Carter, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would stretch on for 2 agonizing decades. Her 7-year-old daughter, Emily, vanished on a warm spring afternoon in 1997. 1 minute chasing butterflies, the next gone without a trace. No scream, no witness, just that lonely little shoe and a mother's scream echoing into the night. Michelle never stopped searching, never stopped hoping. Every birthday, every holiday, every flickering porch light was a prayer cast into the darkness. But 20 years later, just as she was preparing to sell the house she raised her daughter in, a renovation team found something hidden inside a wall: bones, fabric, and the missing red shoe. Emily had never left the house. What really happened inside that home? Who hid the truth? And why did no one hear her cries? The truth has waited long enough to be heard. And what the DNA revealed tore open wounds no one saw coming. Stay with us till the end. You won't want to miss a second of this chilling journey. Now, let's go back to where it all began. It was a cold spring morning in May 1997 when the town of Ashpine changed forever. 7-year-old Emily Carter had done what she always did after school: run through the back field behind her house, skip stones at Maple Creek, and chase butterflies with her best friend, Lucy. But that afternoon, she never came home. The last anyone saw of her was just before 4:30 p.m., her tiny yellow backpack bouncing on her shoulders as she waved goodbye to Lucy and darted toward the woods near the water. That was it. One moment she was there, the next she was gone. For Michelle Carter, Emily's mother, time stopped the moment the police said the words, "We can't find her." That night, Michelle sat in the kitchen, trembling hands wrapped around a coffee mug she couldn't bring to her lips. Emily's homework was still on the table. Her snack, apple slices and a glass of milk, untouched. It was like the world had shifted off its axis, and nothing could be trusted anymore. The search for Emily became the biggest in the town's history. Volunteers scoured the woods. Helicopters hovered for days. Dogs picked up trails that went cold too quickly. The only clue ever found? One of Emily's small red sneakers, caked in mud, lying near the edge of Maple Creek, but no footprints leading away from it. Michelle remembers falling to her knees when the officers brought it to her. She wouldn't have just taken one off, she sobbed. She was scared of bugs. She wouldn't have gone barefoot. The entire town mourned with Michelle and her husband, Mark. But grief did strange things. Mark started sleeping on the couch. Michelle stopped going to church. They eventually separated. Michelle never moved away, though. She stayed in the same house on the same street. Every night she left the porch light on, in case her daughter ever came home. Then, 20 years later, something unimaginable happened. It was the summer of 2017. Michelle, now in her 50s, had finally decided to sell the house. The years had not been kind to it. The paint peeled, the porch sagged, and the memories inside had grown too heavy to carry. She hired a team of renovators to do some final repairs before putting it on the market. On a Tuesday morning, one of the workers called her over. His face was pale. "You need to see this," he said, pointing to a crawl space in the old cellar wall. Inside the opening, wedged behind insulation and broken plaster, were bones. Tiny, curled, wrapped in decayed fabric. And next to them, a red sneaker. Michelle dropped to the floor. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Time didn't just stop. It shattered. The shoe was Emily's. The same design, the same size, and not just similar, the missing one from the pair they'd found by the creek. What was her daughter's shoe doing inside her own house? The remains were turned over to the authorities. It would take weeks to confirm anything with DNA, but Michelle knew. She had known the moment she saw the shoe. But what happened to Emily? Who put her there? And why did everyone think she had disappeared outside? Before the investigation could fully begin, local reporters caught wind of the discovery. The story reignited public interest, reopened old wounds, and set the stage for what would become one of the most shocking revelations in true crime history. But who would have guessed that the truth was never lost? It had been behind the wall all along. Can you imagine discovering your missing child was never really lost, but hidden behind your own walls? What do you think happened to Emily? Let's dive deeper. The moment the authorities cordoned off Michelle's home, it no longer felt like hers. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the front porch like a scar, and the old wooden steps groaned beneath the boots of forensic experts. Her living room, once filled with birthday balloons and baby laughter, was now flooded with evidence markers, latex gloves, and hushed conversations. Michelle sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling in her lap, eyes locked on a small plastic bag on the coffee table. Inside was the red shoe. Faded now, the white rubber sole stained and cracked, but still unmistakable. It was Emily's. She remembered buying it, remembered the argument they had when Emily insisted on wearing it to bed. She'd been 7, just 7 years old. Michelle's voice broke in a whisper. She never left. She was right here. The weeks that followed blurred together. Investigators swarming the house, cadaver dogs sniffing every crevice. Journalists camped on the lawn like vultures. Michelle hardly slept, hardly ate. And then the DNA results came in. The sheriff arrived in person. He removed his hat as he stepped into the dimly lit kitchen, followed by a young forensic analyst carrying a folder clutched tightly to her chest. Michelle looked up, clutching her coffee like it might anchor her to the world. Michelle, the sheriff began gently, we have confirmation. The remains found inside your wall. They belong to Emily. Michelle didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stared, her eyes hollowed by 2 decades of unanswered questions. But the next part, that was the hammer to her heart. There were additional samples, the analyst added, voice barely above a whisper. Traces of DNA not belonging to Emily. On her clothing, on the shoe, on the plaster used to seal the wall. Michelle blinked. What are you saying? The woman looked at the sheriff, then back at Michelle. We matched the DNA. It belongs to someone, you knew. Paws hung like a noose. Your husband, Daniel. Michelle's mug shattered against the floor. Her breath vanished from her chest. No, she whispered. No, that's not possible. He loved her. He mourned her. But suddenly, memories she had buried for decades began clawing back. The late nights, the silence, the way Daniel would leave for hours after arguments, the way he never wanted to talk about Emily's disappearance, how he refused to hang missing posters, claimed they were pointless, and then the renovation plans. The wall Emily had been hidden behind wasn't original. Daniel had added it during a remodeling project just months after Emily vanished. He'd insisted it was to open up the space. Michelle staggered to her feet. He built the wall, she said. He built it and buried her behind it. The truth detonated across Michelle's world. Daniel had died from a stroke just 3 years earlier. She'd held his hand in the hospital. She'd wept for him. She had thanked him for standing by her during the worst time in their lives. Now it all felt like a lie wrapped in silence. Investigators dug deeper into Daniel's past. A former coworker came forward. She had long suspected Daniel of abusive behavior but never had proof. Emily's teacher remembered Emily showing up with bruises one day in 1997, claiming she fell off a swing. And Michelle began to remember things her mind had refused to hold for all those years. Emily's sudden fear of the dark, her reluctance to be left alone with her father, painted a portrait more horrifying than anything Michelle had ever imagined. Not a kidnapping, not a stranger, but a betrayal from within the home. Michelle stood in front of the wall, now torn open, revealing layers of insulation, old wood, and the hollow where her daughter had been entombed. There were toys, drawings, even one of Emily's favorite teddy bears, mummified by time. She reached in and touched the fabric, her fingers trembling. I was right here, baby, she whispered, tears falling silently. All this time, and I never knew. Neighbors came by with casseroles and flowers. Reporters camped outside. But Michelle couldn't speak. Not yet. Not until she understood how she had missed it. She began going through Daniel's journals. Entries filled with normalcy, yard work, grocery lists, notes about fixing the gutters. Nothing about the day Emily vanished. Nothing at all. Until she found a page torn halfway through. She wouldn't stop crying. I told her to be quiet. I didn't mean to. That's where the words stopped. No date, no explanation, just a sickening, unfinished confession. Michelle sank to the floor with the journal in her lap. The betrayal, the horror, it was too much to hold. Emily had cried out. She had begged. And Daniel had hidden her. Behind a wall, behind a lie, behind years of silence. And Michelle had been sleeping in that house, living in it, remembering her husband as a man of strength and sorrow, never realizing she'd been mourning beside the very man who took everything from her. Later that night, Michelle sat alone in Emily's old room, untouched for years. The moonlight painted soft shadows across the pink wallpaper. She reached under the bed and pulled out a shoebox she hadn't opened since 1997. Inside were photos, crayon drawings, and something else, cassette tape, hand-labeled in Emily's messy handwriting. For Mommy, in case I get scared. Michelle's hands trembled as she placed it into the old player. The tape clicked. A child's voice crackled through the static. Hi, Mommy. I'm scared. Daddy says I have to stay in here tonight. Please don't be mad. I didn't mean to make him angry. Michelle's scream was silent, but it echoed through her bones. The room fell still as Emily's young voice echoed from the old cassette player. Hi, Mommy. I'm scared. Daddy says I have to stay in here tonight. Michelle's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled violently, pressing the pause button as her heart pounded in her chest. It wasn't just the voice that broke her. It was the innocence, the trust, the hope her daughter still had, even after whatever had happened that night. Michelle had spent 2 decades carrying guilt. Guilt that she hadn't protected her daughter, that she hadn't known something was wrong. But now, as Emily's tiny voice whispered into the dark through cheap magnetic tape, the guilt turned to fire. She rewound the cassette slightly, forcing herself to listen again. He said not to cry. He said Mommy wouldn't believe me, but I know you will. I know you will. It was more than a message. It was a time capsule of terror. A child's desperate prayer sealed away in plastic and left to rot while the world moved on. But why had she never found it? Michelle tore apart the rest of the box. Old toys, photos, birthday cards. But there was nothing else. Just the voice of a daughter Michelle now realized had been crying for help long before she vanished. And Michelle hadn't heard her. Until now. The last lie. She took the cassette to the authorities the next morning. It was labeled as evidence, carefully digitized, and reviewed in silence by detectives who could barely look Michelle in the eye afterward. A caseworker offered her a therapist. A victim liaison tried to ease her pain with platitudes. But Michelle didn't want comfort. She wanted answers. And more than that, she wanted justice. Although Daniel was dead, she needed the world to know what he had done. To Emily, to her, to everyone who had believed in the grieving father narrative. It had all been a performance, one that had lasted for decades, even in death. Michelle sat down with a local news station for an exclusive interview. The headline blared across the screen. Mother of missing girl discovers daughter's remains in her wall. Father implicated posthumously. The nation was gripped. Comment sections overflowed with outrage and sympathy. Strangers sent flowers. Victims of similar childhood traumas began sharing their own stories. But among the attention was something Michelle didn't expect. A letter came in a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. Daniel wasn't acting alone. Michelle froze. Her fingers tightened around the letter as the walls around her seemed to tilt. What did that mean? New shadows. Investigators took the letter seriously. They dusted it for fingerprints, none. No traceable DNA. But its contents were too specific to dismiss. It mentioned a name, Uncle Greg, Daniel's cousin. A man Michelle hadn't seen in nearly 25 years. He had helped Daniel with the renovation. He'd even built part of the wall. Michelle hadn't thought much of it at the time. He was the quiet type, always around when tools were needed, never too involved. Suddenly, he was back in the spotlight. Detectives tracked him down in a rural town 2 states over. They brought him in for questioning under the pretense of assisting in an old cold case. When asked about the wall, Greg said he barely remembered working on it. When shown a photo of the wall with the remains behind it, his face changed just for a moment, but it was enough. He asked for a lawyer. The secret inside the wall. As part of the renewed investigation, forensic teams returned to the house. They brought thermal scanners, ground-penetrating radar, everything modern science could offer. Michelle stood outside, watching as they peeled back parts of her home she thought she knew. Then, under a false panel just a few feet from where Emily's remains were found, they made another discovery. A diary, small, pink, with a lock long rusted open. The pages inside were water-damaged, faded, but readable in places. The last few entries were what cracked the case wide open. "Daddy is mad again. I spilled juice on the carpet. He said I have to stay in the closet. I told Uncle Greg I don't like the game. He said I'm a liar. Mommy won't believe me." Michelle collapsed to her knees when she read those lines. Greg had been part of it. Maybe not the killing, but the covering up. The manipulation. The control. He had helped Daniel hide her daughter's body. And for 20 years, he had said nothing. The DA's office decided to pursue charges against Greg. Not for murder, but for accessory after the fact and obstruction of justice. When confronted with the diary and the tape Greg cracked, he admitted to helping Daniel fix a mistake, saying he didn't know she was already dead. That night, the internet exploded. Podcasts began discussing the case. News segments followed Michelle's journey. TikTok creators speculated about what else Greg might be hiding. But Michelle ignored the noise. She returned home, climbed into Emily's room, and sat in the corner with the teddy bear they had found in the wall. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, "I believe you now, baby. I hear you." Outside, the sky began to rain. 1 week later, Michelle was cleaning out Daniel's old garage workspace when she found an old metal toolbox she'd never noticed before, sealed shut with a rusted lock. She pried it open, expecting tools, but inside was a set of VHS tapes, each labeled with dates. One of them, July 3rd, 1997, the night Emily vanished. Michelle stared at the stack, hands shaking. What was on them? Was this the final piece of the puzzle, or a truth too horrifying to watch? Michelle sat on the edge of the old workbench, the air thick with dust and dread. The VHS tape marked July 3rd, 1997, trembled in her fingers. It felt heavier than its plastic casing should allow, as if it carried the weight of 2 decades of unanswered questions. She had debated for hours whether to press play. A part of her still hoped for a sliver of innocence, some shred of possibility that Emily's final moments weren't horrifying. But another part, the one that had kept her going through the grief, the lies, and the betrayal, knew better. She slid the tape into the old VCR, a relic she hadn't touched in years, and sat on the carpeted floor. The screen flickered. Static cracked through the speakers. Then came the date, July 3rd, 1997. The video opened in the hallway of their home, Daniel's hand visible as he adjusted the camera on a tripod. The image was grainy but stable. He turned and waved at the lens like a vlogger preparing a tutorial. "Just getting things ready," he muttered. Michelle's stomach turned. Then the frame shifted and she saw Emily, curled on the couch in her pink pajamas, clutching her bear. "Come on, sweetheart. Time for our little talk." Emily flinched. "Mommy said I could stay up late. Mommy's not here right now." Michelle bit her knuckle to stop herself from screaming. The camera remained fixed, unnervingly so, as Daniel coaxed his daughter off the couch and led her toward the basement door. Emily resisted. "I don't want to go down there." "Then don't make me force you." The footage blurred, intermittent static, digital decay. But what came next made Michelle gasp aloud. The frame jumped. A new timestamp, 1:14 a.m. Now the basement. The camera now handheld, shakier. Emily's cries echoed off the walls. There were muffled voices, Daniel's and unmistakably, Greg's. "We can't just leave her like this. You want to go to prison? Help me now." She slipped. She hit her head. We have to fix it. Greg's voice trembled. This is wrong. This is all wrong. And then silence, followed by hammering, scraping. The screen went black. Michelle didn't remember standing, didn't remember grabbing her phone. But when the police arrived, the tape was ready. Her face pale, her hands locked into claws. Within 48 hours, Greg was rearrested. This time, for complicity in manslaughter. He confessed everything. Emily had begged to sleep in her mother's bed that night. But Michelle had been working late. Daniel had lost his temper again. She had fallen down the stairs in a panic, hitting her head against the railing. He hadn't taken her to the hospital. He hadn't called for help. He had called Greg. Together, they buried the truth inside the walls of Michelle's home, right under her nose. And for 20 years, she had lived with her daughter's grave behind a layer of drywall. Justice at last. The story ignited a firestorm. Headlines around the world followed Michelle's story. Her bravery, her pain, her transformation from grieving mother to relentless truth seeker. Greg was sentenced to 25 years, and Daniel's name was formally amended on the official case files. His reputation stripped, the record finally set straight. His family tried to apologize. Michelle didn't respond. But the part of the story that no one could ignore was this. Emily had been right. She had reached out, and even across 2 decades, her voice had been heard. A mother's goodbye. A month later, Michelle held a memorial service. Not just a funeral, but a celebration. She played Emily's favorite songs, displayed her drawings. Hundreds of people came. Some who'd known Emily, others who'd simply followed the story and mourned with Michelle from afar. In the middle of the ceremony, Michelle stepped forward. Her voice wavered, but her resolve did not. My daughter was silenced, buried, forgotten by the world that should have protected her. But she never gave up, and because of that, neither did I. She held up the tiny pink shoe, the one that had started everything. This was the last thing I found, the first clue, a child's cry frozen in time. If you ever doubt your gut, if something feels wrong, listen. Don't wait 20 years to hear the truth. A garden of light. Michelle turned Emily's room into a memory garden. The wall was replaced with a sunlit alcove filled with white roses, angel statues, and a plaque that read, Emily Grace, 1990 to 1997. You were always here. She began volunteering with missing children's organizations, telling her story not to reopen wounds, but to help others prevent them. Sometimes late at night, she'd play the tape again. Not the one from the basement, but the one Emily had recorded for her. I know you'll believe me, Mommy. She'd close her eyes, hold the teddy bear, and whisper, I do now, baby. I do. What would you do if someone you trusted held the key to a decades-old lie? Would you have opened the box, played the tape, chased the truth no matter the cost?